Well, hello everybody and welcome to today's MTPConnect webinar. My name is Libby Pearce and I will be your Zoom host for today. So to hand over though, to launch the session officially, I'm going to hand over to the lovely Lauren Kelly. Lauren, do we have you on the line there?
Yes, thanks Libby.
Beautiful.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Targeted Translation Research Accelerator information session, focused today on round 2 of the research projects funding opportunity, which is currently open. We're really glad that you could join us today. As Libby said, my name's Lauren Kelly. I'm the Senior Director for the TTRA program at MTPConnect, and I will be your facilitator this morning. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands that we are meeting on today. I am personally on Bungarong land and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today for this information session. So before we launch into the session, I'd like to run through a few key pieces of housekeeping. Today's session will include, firstly, a presentation providing a broad overview of the TTRA program in its entirety, and then we'll be drilling down into the key details of the research projects funding opportunity. This will be followed by a panel discussion with representatives from our TTRA program partners, and they will give you advice and tips on how to prepare a competitive application. Following this, we'll then open up the session to the audience so that you can ask us any remaining questions. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A box, which should be available at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom toolbar. And if you have the same question as someone else, you can upvote it and that will raise the question to the top of the list and we'll be able to get to it quickly. So questions can be submitted anonymously, but if there is any need for follow-up, we unfortunately won't be able to reach you. So then you can contact us directly via our TTRA email address, which is displayed in the top right-hand corner of this slide. We do request that audience members hold off on submitting questions until the end of the presentation and panel discussion, as your question may be covered during the course of the session content, and then that will allow us to work through any unanswered questions at the end. For audience members who have a question about whether their research project is within scope or aligns to one of the priority areas identified, we would appreciate if you contact us directly via our TTRA email so we can gather the relevant information from you to make an informed assessment. Unfortunately, we can't have that two-way dialogue during the webinar. For those who wish to review this presentation at a later date, or if you have colleagues who couldn't attend, a recording will be made available as an on-demand video on the MTPConnect website before the end of the week, and we will notify all registrants when it's published. We'll also be turning this session into a podcast episode as well, so you can listen on the go. Today, I'll be joined by my TTRA colleagues at MTPConnect, Dr. Manna Liao, our TTRA Director, and Dr. Erin McCallum, our TTRA Project Manager. Additionally, we are obviously fortunate to also hear from representatives of our program partners, Grace Lefline from Ant Health, Olivia White from the Medical Device Partnering Program, and Dr. Lee Ford from UniQuest. We also have Dr. Amabel Tan from Ant Health and Dr. Andrew Harvey from UniQuest, who will be working behind the scenes and may respond to questions in the Q&A box for you. So before we move into the TTRA program details, I'd now like to introduce MTPConnect's Managing Director and CEO, Dr. Dan Grant, who will provide an overview of MTPConnect and what we do to support the medtech, biotech, pharma and digital health sectors in Australia. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Lauren. As Lauren said, my name's Dan Grant. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of MTPConnect, and I too want to thank you all for coming today to listen to this session on the TTRA Round 2 project grants. We really appreciate your time, and as I look at the bottom of my screen, I can see we have about 162 people online at the moment. So again, thank you very much for your time. My role today is really to just remind those of you about who MTPConnect is. If we can go to the next slide. MTPConnect was established in 2015 as part of the federal government's Growth Centre initiative. We're one of 6 growth centres, and we are mandated with helping to accelerate the growth of the medtech, biotech and pharmaceutical sector in Australia. We have offices in Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane and Sydney, and we work at the nexus between companies, researchers, industry associations, governments, universities, investors, and regulators, all focused on delivering 4 key outcomes for the sector. We're very much interested in increasing collaboration and commercialization across the sector, making sure that Australia is well positioned to capitalize on the research that's conducted within our research institutes and universities. We spend a lot of time working to improve management and workforce skills in the sector, making sure those skills are fit for purpose so the sector can grow. We run trade delegations and international missions to help improve access to global supply chains and international markets. And finally, we work very closely with state and federal governments to help optimize regulatory and policy environments. If we go to the next slide, please. We've been very fortunate to secure more than $180 million of funding from the Growth Center Initiative and the Medical Research Future Fund to help achieve these objectives. And while I don't want to spend any time at all on the programs that we run, you'd be familiar with our Growth Center Initiative, which has $15.6 million of funding committed to the sector. We have Biomed Tech Horizons 1 through 4, another $45 million focused on improving opportunities for medical technologies in Australia. Both of these programs are largely committed. You'll know the Biomed Tech or the BTB program, the Biomedical Translation Bridge program, another $22.3 million program, again, largely committed to 21 programs and we're delivering that with 3 of our key partners, including MDPP and UniQuest. We have a program that is open. It's called READY. This is a training and education program. It's a $32 million program. And I do want to spend just a minute talking to you about this because there is an opportunity for individuals to apply to READY to secure fellowships. So clinicians, academics, and other MTP professionals who would like to work for up to a year within an industry partner can apply to the READY program to secure a fellowship. And I mention this now because just this week we've relaxed the selection criteria for the READY Fellowship program, opening this program up to smaller, earlier stage companies to act as the sponsor. And so if you're interested in working in industry, if you've got a collaboration with a small company that you would like to work in for up to a year, please go to the READY website and check out how you might apply for one of these fellowships. The fellowships will provide up to $250,000 in funding to allow you to do this. But today we're here really to talk about the Targeted Translational Research Accelerator program. And this is one of our newest programs. It's a $47 million program that Lauren will tell you more details about in a few minutes. But today we're really here to talk to you about round 2 of our project fund. And I'll pass back to Lauren now, and she can talk to you in detail about the program. I'll end by just again thanking you all for your attention today. We look forward to receiving applications both to the READY Fellowship Program, but also to the TTRA project grants from many of you in the near future. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Dan. And before we jump into the TTRA program, we'd like to learn a little bit more about who's joining us today. So as Dan said, we have over 150 people online today, which is a really fantastic turnout. And thank you for joining us this morning. So we'd like to run 3 quick polls. They're up on your screen at the moment and you'll be able to complete them all. So the first is to find out which modality your research aligns with. So you can tick all that apply there. The second is to learn which priority area out of the 5 that we've called for you are most interested in. Again, ticking all that apply. And lastly, which organisation type you were from. I'll give you a few moments to complete that and you'll be able to let me know when everyone's finished polling.
Yes, and just a reminder too, once you've answered everything, just to hit the submit button so that it comes through. Thank you. We've got quite good participation, Lauren.
Great.
So it's coming through thick and fast. Might just give everybody another 20 seconds or so. Okay, looks like they're all coming in. So I'm just going to end that poll and I'll pop those results up on the screen for everybody.
Fantastic.
You got those there, Lauren? Great.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So I'll run through these quickly. So we're actually seeing quite an even split with respect to the different modalities. So behavioural intervention, about 33% of our audience members are interested in BI, 47% in digital health, 41% in medical devices, and 52% in therapeutics. So that's fantastic to see that we're reaching a really broad audience base with this information session. I guess reflecting on round one, we can actually see that there's been a greater uptake of those that are interested in BI. We only had about 9% of applications that were BI focused in round one. So it's great to see that a bigger audience percentage is interested in that modality for this round. With the priority areas, again, we're seeing all of the audience interested across the two cardiovascular disease priority areas, as well as the obesity, mental health, and glucose control. And finally, we're seeing, again, probably, which is quite reflective of round one, the largest audience base is coming from the medical research and university, that public research organisation, and then 17% from corporations, and then another 17% or so from other corporate or other entities. I guess reflecting on round one there, we had about 70% of applicants were from the public research organisation base, so the MRIs and the universities. 28% was from corporations, and then 2% from other corporate entities. So it's great to see that we're getting a broad audience base joining us today. So we'll get into the main event. So the TTRA is a $47 million program, as Dan said, to support the development of innovative, preventative, diagnostic, therapeutic and management approaches for diabetes and cardiovascular disease, as well as their associated complications. And this is being run over a 5-year term. The TTRA funding is drawn from the Public and Preventative Health Initiative of the MRFF. So while there is a clear focus on health equity approaches, the TTRA program also has commercialization objectives. And the program funding is deployed across 3 pillars. The first is to establish through a competitive process 2 research centres, one for diabetes and one for cardiovascular disease associated complications. And applications for these were called for at the beginning of the year, and the outcome of this funding is imminent. The 2 research centres will be funded for 4 years through the TTRA, and there is an expectation that they will be sustainable thereafter to continue to carry out their work. The second pillar, which is what we're focused on today, is to award research project funding. Again, this is through a competitive process. So in January, we called for the first round, which focused on common pathways, interactions and complexities for people experiencing comorbidities of diabetes and CVD, with the added overlay of mental health, chronic kidney disease or other cardiac or vascular complications. So last month, the first round awardees were announced, with $5.2 million flowing to 7 projects addressing the 3 different priority areas called for. But we are here to talk today about round 2, which has just been opened. And as you'll note from this slide, there will be a 3rd round of research projects, which we expect to be announced in about mid-2022. So underpinning both the centres and the research projects, we will be fostering the translation of research and promoting collaboration with industry through Pillar 3. We've partnered with preeminent organisations focused on research, translation and commercialisation to support applicants and awardees of Pillar 2 research projects, as well as the research centres. And the research centres and research project awardees will have the opportunity to engage with one another. This will provide further opportunities for new collaborations to build, as well as accessing training programs and workshops to aid in their translation of the research through a series of annual partnering summits. And Erin will be able to talk to those in more detail. So the TTRA is unique in comparison to some of the other MRFF programs that Dan highlighted earlier, in that we have an independent expert advisory board, which has been nominated by the Minister for Health and Aged Care and is chaired by Professor Ian Fraser. So our TTRA board is diverse and highly experienced, with deep expertise around diabetes and cardiovascular disease via advocacy and lived experience perspectives, clinical, biomedical and public health research strengths, as well as commercialisation and investment viewpoints. As you'll recall, on the TTRA program overview slide, just 2 slides before this, across both the research centres and the research projects funding opportunity, we have been and we will continue to undertake a national coordinated health sector needs assessment in diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And this is to ensure that the funding opportunities that we call for supplement existing initiatives and fill emerging research and clinical gaps not currently addressed in the sector. So we've partnered with Monash University's Behaviour Works, ANU and Research Australia to deliver on firstly identifying and then prioritising the unmet needs for the TTRA funding rounds. So the process of the needs assessment is, it follows 4 key principles. The first being scope. So for round 2, the overarching question that was asked via a survey was, what is the most critical unmet need in diabetes or CVD? And this question was answered by 180 individuals, representative of researchers, clinicians, other healthcare professionals, industry, knowledge of the lived experience, advocates, investors, and other sector stakeholders. Through the survey, an exhaustive long list of over 500 potential priorities were identified. And then as we moved through to principle 3, a validated coding framework was then used to turn this sort of long list into a shorter list of unique topics to be discussed at a roundtable with a representative group of individual experts and consumers. This group used set criteria, which focused on clinical impact, quality of life, as well as commercial potential, economic or productivity benefits, and consumer expectations to prioritise the unique unmet needs that we've now called for as part of round 2. For those in the audience who participated in the roundtables, you may recall that there was significant discussion around health service delivery innovations and the need to address the inequity and barriers to accessing care that do exist in Australia. So while this type of research cannot be funded within the scope of the TTRA program, we acknowledge how important it is. And as such, all applications for round 2 will be assessed on how they will achieve or enhance equitable health service delivery or access in Australia, particularly for regional, rural and remote populations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and other underserved groups. So you'll no doubt be aware the 5 priority areas for round 2 research projects funding are atherosclerosis, including cerebrovascular disease, cardiomyopathy and its associated heart failure, and then obesity, mental health or glucose control as it relates to diabetes. For those who applied for round 1 in our audience, you may recall that mental health was already was also a priority then. However, this was in the context of people living with both diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And through the second needs assessment, it became clear how significant an unmet need this is for people living with diabetes, hence its prioritisation again in round 2. So I'd now like to welcome Erin to take us through the details of the round 2 research projects funding opportunity. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Lauren. So now that you all have some background on the TTRA program as a whole and the needs assessment process and its outcomes which have informed those priority areas for round 2, I'll now take you through the specifics of the research projects funding opportunity. So the scheme can provide between $200,000 and $750,000 in cash to help eligible organisations develop innovative preventative, diagnostic, therapeutic and disease management products and solutions addressing those priority areas. The project term for funded TTRA research projects is a maximum of 24 months, and to be eligible, applicants are required to provide a co-contribution to the value of 50% of the TTRA funding request. So for example, if you're applying for $400,000 in TTRA funding, you will need to demonstrate a commitment of $200,000. This co-contribution can be cash or in-kind or a combination of both. And I see we've already had a question on that today and a number of questions prior to the information session as well. So again, that can be cash or in-kind or a combination. Additional cash or in-kind contributions above this threshold will be viewed favourably, but that is not a requirement. Examples of possible in-kind contributions that you may include could be salaries for key personnel that are actively engaged in the project, equipment or infrastructure that is used and can be valued, provision or manufacture of a drug for a study or clinical trial, or other things of that nature. The TTRA program will support a range of approaches or modalities, and these include digital health solutions, medical devices, therapeutics, and standalone behavioural interventions. The application form and selection criteria are specific to the different modalities, So it's really important that you submit your application through the most appropriate modality stream. Ultimately, the modality you select depends on where your project's novelty and core differentiation lie. To help you determine this, we have included a decision-making framework and descriptions of the different modalities on page 13 and 14 of the funding guidelines, which can be downloaded from the MTPConnect website. And I'll just give you a brief overview of the different modalities now. So for digital health, digital technologies are presented either alone or in combination with physical products to treat, diagnose, cure, mitigate, and/or prevent disease. Some examples include mobile health applications, connected and wearable devices where the innovation or novelty is in the software or the algorithm, telemedicine solutions which are delivering a clinical outcome for patients, care coordination systems with clear patient outcomes, clinical decision support tools, and digital tools for evidence-based behaviour change. The common denominator for all of these being that they have a clear impact on clinical outcomes and deliver improved care. So for medical devices, a medical device is any instrument, apparatus, appliance, material, or other article, whether used alone or in combination and including the software that's necessary for its application, that is intended to be used for the purpose of diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, or alleviation of disease. Some examples include implantable devices, drug delivery devices, medical imaging, in vitro diagnostics, and assessment or monitoring devices. So for therapeutics, the therapeutic classes that are within scope for the TTRA program are fairly broad. Say if you're working on an antibody, a peptide, a cell or gene therapy, a small molecule, or constructs of any combination of these, you'll fall within the therapeutic stream. Other categories may also fall within therapeutics. If your project involves repurposing a drug, we strongly encourage you to get in contact with MTPConnect prior to submitting your expression of interest. Behavioural interventions are interventions or lifestyle changes designed to affect the actions that individuals take with regard to their health in order to improve outcomes with respect to prevention, treatment, or management of disease. Some examples include structured education programs, for example, quit smoking programs, healthy diets and exercise programs, psychological programs, health enablement using IT, and environmental restructuring. There are others, and you can find some of these listed within the application form. The TTRA program is principally seeking to support projects that will reach a commercial or health economic value inflection point by the end of the TTRA funding term. So this will position your product or solution more attractively to garner that next investment, whether it is another grant, industry partnership or license, or investment from venture capital. As such, this position at the end of the TTRA funding term will be unique to each project, and it is your job to articulate this in your application. Generally speaking though, blue sky discovery and ideas and concepts that have no technical validation will be too early and therefore out of scope for the program. The TTRA program, as with other MRFF funded programs that MTPConnect delivers, is also seeking to build capabilities and capacity around translation, commercialization, implementation and adoption for the Australian research and clinical sectors. To that end, we have partnered with AndHealth, MDPP and UniQuest to provide guidance and support to applicants both during the application process and post-award. During the application process, this support comes in the form of the consultation phase, which follows EOI, and I'll outline that shortly. And post-award, the awardees can leverage the deep expertise of our partners to support successful delivery of their project plan. An additional value add aspect of the TTRA program will be the annual partnering summit, which Lauren mentioned, and MTPConnect will co-host that with the successful research centres. Research project awardees will also be invited to join. The Partnering Summit will be an opportunity to access advice, assistance and training with respect to research translation, development pathways and commercialisation. We will also be exploring the opportunity to invite relevant external researchers, industry and investors to the events to increase potential for collaborative research and development and synergies and investment. And this will also provide research project awardees with the opportunity to develop peer-to-peer and industry links with each other and the TTRA research centres. In terms of eligibility, this is laid out in detail on pages 9 and 10 of the funding guidelines, along with a comprehensive list of eligible and ineligible expenditure. Eligible applicant organisations must have an ABN and must meet the MRFF's definition of an eligible organisation. So this includes medical research institutes, universities and corporations, but please note that large corporations are not eligible, and we define this as having 200 or more employees. Medical research institutes and universities are not impacted by that employee cap. Legally and financially separate Commonwealth or state government entities are also eligible, and I'd just like to point out that there is no preference given to any type of organisation over another. The proposal must be addressing an identified priority area that Lauren outlined, and the product or solution must be applicable in markets beyond Australia. Applicants and organisations can submit multiple applications for the research projects, so long as they are different projects. You can also submit projects that have been submitted for other pending grant opportunities, but we ask that you declare this in your application. If your project was to be submitted for multiple opportunities, then you need to be mindful that you cannot be funded for the same activities or project twice, as this is considered double dipping. There is nothing precluding you from applying for this round if you applied in round 1, as long as the project is addressing one of the round 2 priority areas. In terms of IP eligibility, it is imperative that applicants control or have the legal right to access relevant IP. So we've included an IP eligibility flowchart on page 10 of the funding guidelines to allow you to self-assess the IP status of your project and determine if it meets the IP eligibility requirements of the funding opportunity. Please take a close look at this, and if you're still unsure about the IP status of your project, feel free to get into the TTRA team, but note that we are unable to give you IP advice. The application and selection process is a multi-stage leaky funnel. Initially, applications are submitted as expressions of interest and are firstly checked for eligibility by MTPConnect. They are then reviewed by MTPConnect and the TTRA program partners, as well as independent individuals representing consumer and public health perspectives. It is expected that a significant proportion of applications will then move forward to the consultation phase, which I mentioned earlier. Here, they will be matched with an appropriate TTRA partner who will undertake a consultative due diligence process, allowing the applicant to address EOI review feedback and take a deeper dive into the project under confidentiality. I'd like to emphasise that this process is not only valuable for developing your TTRA application, but it can also generally add value to your project as you're thinking about commercialisation and implementation. Following this, the selection panel will reassess the applications, and a short list of projects will move forward to the final stage to submit a full proposal. An independent international and national investment panel of experts will review these full proposals and make recommendations for funding awards. The successful applicant will then enter into a formal funding agreement with MTPConnect and will have regular reporting obligations. As outlined earlier, awardees will have the ongoing benefit of mentorship from the TTRA partner throughout the duration of their TTRA funding. As a general guide, for round 1, roughly half of applicants at each stage made it through to the next stage in the process. So finally, I'll just briefly mention the selection criteria, which I think the panel will delve into a bit further. Applications will be assessed against 5 broad selection criteria themes, being challenge and solution, technical merit, project plan, commercialization and implementation, and team and capabilities. And I'd like to point out that these are all weighted equally. For both technical merit, commercialization and implementation, there are tailored questions and selection criteria for the different modalities. So again, I stress the importance of selecting the correct modality for your innovation. The selection criteria are quite comprehensive and can be found from page 18 of the funding guidelines. So I'll now pass back to Lauren, who will lead you through the panel discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin, for providing all of that detail. So I'd now like to introduce our panelists who, through the course of our conversation, will provide advice on how to best approach the development of your expression of interest and produce a competitive application. And we'll use the framework of the selection criteria to work through this. So I'll be joined by Mana Liao from MTPConnect and representatives from our TTRA partners, Grace Lethlean from Ant Health, Olivia White from MDPP, and Lee Ford from UniQuest. So if you haven't already put your camera on, please do. So can I ask you all to please introduce yourselves, and for those who are not from MTPConnect, also provide an overview of your respective organisations just for our audience's benefit. So I'll start with you, Mana.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Mana Liao, Director of the TTRA program. I have a background in medical research, intellectual property management, and commercialization. And in the last round of research project, we have received many high quality applications, and we're looking forward to support more in this round. And I hope the tips that we're providing you today will come handy in preparing your application. So I'll now pass on to Grace.
Thanks, Manna. I've got a background in engineering and commercialization, and I'm co-founder of And Health, and we're thrilled to be a venture partner under TTRA. And Health specialises in digital health and is Australia's only organisation which designs and delivers specialised technology identification, screening and commercialisation programs proven to accelerate the scale-up and commercial growth of these digital health companies. So we've provided over 1,700 hours of commercialisation support to over 460 companies since 2017, and we'll be providing mentoring and commercialisation advice to digital health applicants and funding recipients under TTRA. But if you're not digital health and you're in said medical device, you'll have the pleasure of working with Olivia and her team.
Thank you, Grace. So I'm Olivia White. I'm from the Medical Device Partnering Program, or MDPP, and my background, surprisingly, is all centred around medical devices, encompassing everything from research and development right through to sales, marketing and management. So I bring this expertise to our team at MDPP and to our Ideas Incubator, which fosters early stage collaborations between researchers, industry, end users, government, to help entrepreneurs and researchers develop novel medical devices with global market potential. So MDPP is a national initiative, and it's an initiative of the Medical Device Research Institute of Flinders University. It works with over 30 national partners across Australia, and since commencing 13 years ago, has assessed over 720 ideas for new medical or assisted technologies. So if you choose medical devices, you'll have access to our team of innovation and commercialise experts. However, if it's therapeutics you're after, then it will be Lee Ford and his team at UniQuest.
Thanks, Olivia. So I'm Lee Ford. My background is in therapeutic drug discovery and translation of academic research, and I'm the project manager at UniQuest. UniQuest is a leading university-based commercialization company which manages the intellectual property of the University of Queensland. It's created more than 100 startups from UQ Research and raised more than $812 million to take UQ technologies to market. UniQuest QWERTY is a small molecule drug discovery capability, translating academic biomedical research into new drugs to deliver faster health benefits. In the context of the TTRA, QWERTY and UniQuest more broadly provide expertise and mentoring to the therapeutics modality.
Great. Thanks, Lee. And for those that are behavioural intervention applicants and then awardees, you'll have the pleasure of working with a combination of our TTRA partners and leveraging their complementary skill sets there. So diving into the first selection criteria theme, which is challenge and solution, here you'll be asked to link your proposed product or solution to the identified priority area that you're applying through. So Olivia, what advice would you have for applicants tackling this section?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is that all of the sections are weighted evenly at 20%, but consider challenge and solution in this section to be where you can make your first impression to the reviewing panel. This is where you describe how your product or solution fits with one of the 5 priority areas. So you get the opportunity to hook the reviewers in with your unique value proposition. If you've ever penned an NHMRC application, think of this section as the first page of your grant. So the selection panel will be looking for a clear demonstration of the problem to be solved for a specific patient group and a solution that is meaningfully different from what is out there at the moment. So for example, with therapeutics or medical devices, they'll be looking to a tailored novel intervention to address a serious unmet need. For digital health and behavioural interventions, a competitive application is a solution that solves a problem for patients, carers or healthcare professionals, delivering clear patient outcomes and health economic benefits. In round 1, the competitive applications were those that could also articulate the existing market environment and could explain how their product or solution is more competitive over those in the market at the moment or has an advantage over what might be in development. This round, applications will also need to include information on how a product or solution that you're developing will achieve or enhance equitable health service delivery across Australia. So if you would like some extra tips on how to approach this section, MTPConnect put out a great webinar last year called Show Me the Money. So I would highly suggest you watch that. And I guess my final tip would be, if you've got someone outside of your workplace or even a partner, to have a read of this section. If they understand what you're trying to achieve, it's a great litmus test to know that you're on the right track for a successful commercialisation grant.
Great, thanks, Olivia. And we'll drop the Show Me the Money webinar link into the chat box shortly, and it will also be distributed out to all registrants when we follow up and let you know that this on-demand video is available. So moving on to the technical merit section, here we'll be seeking to understand your product or solution at its obviously technical level and the approach you've taken in developing and validating your innovation to date. So although there are some commonalities to this section across the different modalities, such as scalability of the solution or engagement with stakeholders, it is recognised that due to the distinct R&D pathways required for progressing digital health solutions versus therapeutics versus medical devices or standalone behavioural interventions, the EOI form will therefore provide separate questioning and separate assessment of the different modalities. So Grace, from a digital health perspective, how would you approach this section?
Thanks, Lauren. So in this section for the digital health applicants, we're looking at the stage of development that the solution is at. So what the solution is, how it works, and how it fits into clinical and patient workflows to make that impact. So a digital health application that's successful will clearly address a number of core factors. Let's go through them. I'd say that the end user, payer and beneficiary need to be clearly identified, and that's pointed out in the tips. So do take the time to read the tips, they're there for your help, and a strong application will really point that out. Also, that your product clearly solves a pain point for the clinician and the patient, and this is a place to put some clinical outcomes, and that your product focuses on those clinical outcomes and not simply on, say, improved back-end data management. You need to have a clear articulation of how the solution will integrate into the current clinical workflow and patient journey, or if implementation will require an entire new system regime change, spell out how that would work in practice. This is a place to provide evidence and explanation of your engagement with key stakeholders throughout the whole value chain of your product. So you've got users and payers and beneficiaries and any demand for your solution from any and all groups. This is also a place to provide any evidence or data demonstrating that your proposed solution is likely to deliver on the outcomes that you're intending. And a bonus if the prototype or proof of concept has been tested with clinicians and patients and end users, or maybe you've done a UX UI study. Finally, do show us that you've given consideration to the scalability and key integrations required, as well as data security and access, ownership and data privacy. So I hope that's helpful for the digital health applicants out there. And Olivia can help support the medical device applicants. How can they make a strong technical selection, Olivia?
Okay, well, in this section, it's really your opportunity to show what technical and stakeholder engagement work you've completed to date. So take the panel on a journey from your preclinical benchtop data right through to any animal or clinical studies you've completed that validate your technology. You'll also need to show evidence that your device is safe and that you understand what class of regulation it falls under. So the TTRA aims to fund projects that will reach a commercial inflection point by project end. In round one, device applicants were successful in reaching consultation phase if they were at a technical readiness level or TRL level of 3 and above. And most were projecting to try and reach TRL 5 by the project end. So if you're not familiar with the TRL levels, it is in the EOI. And TRL 5 is when a device is ready to be compared against existing modalities in its indication for use. So early involvement from stakeholders is also really important and key in product design. So the reviewers will be interested to see what level of engagement you've undertaken so far, and if you've encompassed any early feedback from clinicians into the design of your product. So competitive applications from round one were able to provide this evidence, and this could have been in the form of voice of customer analysis or needs analysis documents. And it was really important that they were able to show that they could describe how their device could be incorporated into current clinical flow or existing clinical practice. So maybe take that on as a tip. Evidence of other stakeholder engagement is also looked on favourably. So this could be engagement with groups such as end users, patients, local health networks, advocacy groups, manufacturers, or supply chain partners. And like Grace, scalability is really important. So there is a question on that in the EOI, and it's also looking at the barriers to adoption that might exist into implementing your new device into the market. So be prepared to add some information about your intended manufacturing and implementation plans. Lee, how would therapeutic applicants approach this section?
Thanks, Olivia. So in therapeutics, you'll need to demonstrate that the biological target is sufficiently validated for the priority area in relevant disease states. The reviewers will be looking for link to disease, complementary approaches to target validation, and a robust data set supporting translation of efficacy into the clinic. You also need to assess the safety risk of your approach in the relevant patient population. Competitive applications will comprise reproducible, controlled, and standardized data. Space is going to be really tight in the EOI, so a tip to demonstrate experimental robustness is a complete but concise list of experimental features. For example, after an in vivo ED50, include details such as species and strain, dose, including route and regimen, group size, measures of significance, and statistical method. The assessors will also be looking for things like controls and commercial benchmarks. Manna, how will behavioural intervention applications be judged on their technical merit?
Surely. So for this section, for the behavioral intervention, you will be assessed upon the evidence-based biomedical and psychosocial benefits that can be implemented or adopted by end users, public and community. So the reviewers will seek intervention that can deliver clinical value and health economic benefits, which can conveniently fit or complement within the existing clinical workflow or fits the typical patient journey. Competitive applications will also provide evidence of end user demand or clinical support over the existing solutions and proof of principal use in the clinical or market setting. Also, it's important for applicants to identify what are the key challenges in the uptake and the adoption and present a strategic approach in addressing them. If your application incorporates a behavioral intervention in combination with any of the other modalities as discussed previously, the modality stream to apply through will be dependent to where does your project's novelty and core differentiation lie. For example, if you're using an off-the-shelf video conferencing tool as a medium for delivering a novel psychological care to help to improve mental health, in that case, you should apply through the behavioral intervention stream. However, if your core innovation is in the actual design of a new software or device technology to allow the implementation and adoption of behavioral change, then digital health or medical device would be more appropriate. But if you're still unsure which modality stream to apply, MTPConnect and the partners are more than happy to meet with you to advise on your specific project.
Thanks, Manna. Yes, definitely just reach out and have a chat with us. We don't bite. So while it's appreciated that EOIs are brief, a single page upload can be attached to support your EOI submission. So this upload can include data, figures, images, or other supporting information that you have generated yourself, or it can be taken from the literature. But please ensure that you use appropriate referencing for the reviewer's benefit and provide a link back to your in-text responses in Smarter Grants to discuss the data and its significance. The upload can be used to support your whole submission from providing, for example, benchmarking or evidence of differentiation to support the challenge and solution section through your technical validation or to outline, say, a project plan workflow. However, please note that this one-page upload is not a place to just get an additional 500 words into your EOI. It is for supporting data only. So moving on to project plan, description of your TTRA funded project plan may sound very straightforward, but we do see some traps that applicants fall into when addressing this section. So Grace, can you articulate what assessors will be keeping a close eye on in this section of the EOI?
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, I have to share some of my favourite part. I think it's the the part where you can be really creative and actually make a big impact on your innovation at this point. So the project plan, look, the goal of the TTRA is to move translational research towards this commercial reality and community impact. So it's important that you can clearly articulate what stage you're at, where you want to get to, and support that with evidence, and define both major and incremental milestones of your proposed project. So being vague will only hurt you in the project plan unless you can just clearly justify why you're unable to plan a certain stage right now. Just dot point it out. Slabs of text are actually less clear. And remember that the funding is up for 20 to 24 months. So while some targets might extend beyond the 24 months, we really want to know how this funding will be used in the next 2 years and what the expected outcomes and impact of those project activities will be on your solution's ability to be commercialized. So remembering that overall, it's essential that the proposed activities are on the critical path towards key translational milestones and commercial proof of concept. Another hint is to be clear about the risks in the development of your solution and how that proposed projects will address these. So an all green risk register actually does not indicate a strong project. Look, for example, if for your application, understanding exactly what data is required to achieve regulatory approval is a bit of a risk for you guys, that's all right. Don't pretend that you know and just put data gathering for regulatory approval as an activity alone. This is actually a chance, an opportunity to put a task around engaging a contractor to understand the data required for regulatory approval and expert review of clinical trial structure towards regulation. And then you can do your clinical trial. You can actually get budget for those activities. So that would indicate a well thought out project where TTRA program can make a real impact. And note that the use of funds does cover many professional services to assist you on that critical path towards translation. So don't forget your project risks and do consider all the categories of risks. Look, finally, it's important, of course, that the amount requested is realistic, that the requested amounts generally match the task at hand. If it doesn't pass the back of the envelope test, it probably won't pass the review committee. So that's my tip there.
Thanks, Grace. So what we've heard so far is that it's important to not only provide an overview of the big picture, which is your challenge and solution section, your technical work done to date, and then your project at hand, but also we are looking at the later stages of development as your solution or product moves towards clinical work or end user adoption. So within the commercialization and implementation section of the EOI, we are seeking a clear understanding of the commercial potential or your health economic benefit of the proposed product or solution. And this will depend on if there is a commercialization pathway, say if you've got a therapeutic, a device or a digital health solution, or an implementation adoption pathway for behavioural interventions. Please be mindful of the tips that we've provided throughout the EOI application form. They're there for nearly every single question, and they're really helpful guide to include for what to include in your responses. So they've been tailored for the different modalities as appropriate. So really, we encourage you to use these to your advantage. So the first section of commercialization and implementation is IP. While it is not a requirement to have already been granted IP protection or have applied for it for this scheme, it is important to outline the strategy behind securing a strong IP position. So Manna, what advice do you have for applicants here?
Thanks, Lauren. So intellectual property or IP is a significant consideration in this section, as Lauren has mentioned. So IP is an intangible asset of innovation, meaning it has value and can be sold, licensed or traded, and not necessarily technological. So it could be the knowledge or the staff expertise. So IP protection and IP strategy are both critical for a successful commercial outlook, but often overlooked in the academic setting. So in the last round, quite a number of the applications did not progress due to their lack of ownership or control rights of the IP. For example, the tested drug used for the project is owned by a pharmaceutical company, and there's no IP arrangement between the applicant and the company. So as a priority, before you go too deep in crafting your application, I would highly recommend you conducting a self-assessment on your IP eligibility using the flowchart on page 10 of the funding guidelines to avoid disappointment down the track. So there are a number of ways IP may be protected against copying or other unfair usage by competitors. Patents, trademark, and design are the legal registration that many of you are familiar with. Other forms of IP protection that don't require legal registration, but can sometimes be just as effective, include trade secret, know-how, and copyrights. Across all the modalities, competitive applications will be those that can articulate the strategic value of their IP and the strategy to protect the innovation, which can encompass a mix of forms of IP protection. In general, therapeutics and medical devices, which result in more tangible products, will place more emphasis on patents and design registration. Whereas for digital health and behavioral intervention, the traditional patent may not be appropriate for the business model. If applicant has already filed a patent, reviewers will be seeking favorable terms in the application. For example, does it consist of a broad patent claim, or does it have a clear freedom to operate or search report? A common weakness we have seen in the past applications was the insufficient articulation of how they're going to secure market share and how to protect their innovation in the absence of a patent. So it's really important that for you to fully expand on your IP protection mechanism, such as using trade secret, trademark, a first mover advantage, or exclusive access agreements, so that it can provide your reviewer the confidence in your commercial outlook. So in practice, investors or venture capitals will not be interested in the work, even if it is brilliant science, without a robust IP strategy behind. If you are using third-party IP, for example, a drug provided by a pharmaceutical company or an off-the-shelf software, make sure you have obtained the legal right or the agreement to conduct the work, and keeping a clean chain of titles of any future project IP. You will not want to be in a situation of infringing others' IP after done all the hard work. So the top tip here I would like to give is to seek early advice from your technology transfer office if you're from the university or a medical research institute, because they manage the IP portfolios for your institute, or a patent attorney or IP advisor if you're from a SME or company, so that you don't accidentally jeopardize your IP position and can leverage on their resources and expertise to build on a stronger application. So I will now throw to Olivia to talk you through the clinical and the regulatory aspects of the application.
Thanks, Manna. So in this section, you'll be asked about clinical and regulatory plans. So what the reviewers will be looking for is what comes next. What future studies or projects do you need to complete after or in conjunction with your TTRA project to keep you moving along the innovation and commercialization pathway? So for some, but not all, this will include talking about what future clinical studies need to be performed before your product or solution makes it to market. For therapeutics or a drug device, this is the ideal section to include what you're going to do to complete that data package that you need to complete your target product profile. For regulatory, the panel will be looking to see that you've clearly identified your pathway, including any barriers you might expect regarding approval. So you'll need to cite the regulatory classification from the TGA and any other jurisdictions you're planning to target. For digital health applicants, there's been some recent changes from the TGA to software as a medical device. So you should really consider this. Information can be found on the TGA website, or you could connect with our partners here and Health for some advice in this space. So the regulation in this environment is really complex. Some of you might not have ever engaged in this space before, or you might have an external consultant helping you out. So if you are in that position, or if you're in the early position at a university or a research institution, this is also a good opportunity to work with your tech transfer office, as Manna said before, or maybe an internal business partner to collaborate on what you need to do. So, and in the application, you can highlight this collaboration in this section. The other area that's obviously really important is understanding your target market. Grace, could you expand on this a little more for us?
Yes, sure. Look, for the target market, the customer type should be identified. Now, who will be the ultimate payer for your product? Or if you don't intend to be taking it to market yourself, who will acquire or partner for your solution? Now, careful here if you intend for the government or a health system to pay. It's legitimate, But for this, please articulate how they might pay. For example, are there reimbursement codes? Is there specific funding for this kind of service? Or even a precedent for funding for analogous products or services? If you've engaged with or spoken to any payers, this is the time to definitely let us know. Market size should be realistically quantified. Step us through your workings and how you fit into the market, particularly in crowded markets. If markets are small but growing, it's worth taking the time to discuss that predicted growth. Now, we noticed in the last round, a lot of people missed an opportunity in this market section. So please do look at the tips. They are there to guide you. For those who were successful in the last round, they were able to answer the questions thoroughly and obviously really read the tips. For those of you with a commercial partner or access to a commercialization office, leverage their expertise and support for this section. It's equally weighted to all the other sections. You will need to describe your business model and your commercialization strategy. So it's important that there is a clear commercialization strategy, and at the center of that strategy is that there's evidence of market demand or a market need, and that the potential paying customer or pathway has been identified. Strong applications may have even gone beyond the hypothetical and might, for example, have approached a potential commercialization partner or developed a revenue model or have a plan to attract independent funding or revenue. So Lee, could you elaborate on these commercialization strategies?
Sure, Grace. As a building block in your commercialization strategy for devices, digital health and therapeutics, the reviewers will be looking for a commercial proof of concept or value inflection point at the completion of your TTRA funded project. A common proof of concept in therapeutics could be to license the project to a pharma partner who has the expertise and resources to bring a product to market. Alternatively, the project could receive investment for clinical development in a newly formed startup. Some example value inflection points might be the selection of a preclinical candidate or promising efficacy data in an animal model that industry recognises as being transferable to the clinic. Olivia, could you give us an example of a commercial proof of concept or value inflection point in the in the medical devices space?
Sure. So really, I referred to the technology readiness level or TRL classification earlier, and every time you move up that classification, that could be seen as a value inflection point. So going back to sort of TRL 5, if you're able to show safety and efficacy in an appropriate animal model, that is a value inflection point that you can go and get angel investment or maybe even do a Series A capital raise. So that's probably a good example to think about. Grace?
Sorry, Olivia, jumping in there, so excited. Digital health, also has its own value inflection points. For example, you might have planned your regulatory approval process and got the correct data for clinical trial data for your TGA approval. That's a great inflection point. Or maybe you've engaged with key stakeholders, demonstrated your solution in a real world setting, and got some clinical and commercial pilot outcomes to drive uptake or investment.
Great, thanks, Grace. So I think one common feature that we would all agree on across all modalities is that highly scored EOIs will demonstrate evidence that prospective partners see promise in the project and are willing to invest. Manna, can you highlight why implementation as opposed to commercialization may be more relevant in the behavioural intervention modality?
Surely. So BI or behavioural intervention is quite different to the other modalities mentioned. We recognise that the core value of behavioural intervention opportunity may not be at commercialisation, but more on the significant economic health benefit from translation and implementation of the solution in the community. So for this reason, in the EOI, we purposely ask the behavioural intervention applicants to expand on their business model in terms of implementation or adoption strategy to the targeted markets or end users after the completion of the TTRA funded project, without mandating for a commercialization strategy like the other modalities. For example, if it's a psychological program for tackling obesity to prevent type 2 diabetes, we would like to know how you will integrate the program into the existing clinical workflow. For example, is it going to be through a partnership, a license, or sale of solution, or the IP? We will also like you to identify the potential payer for the solution. Is it through the hospitals, insurance, or insurance company? And also evidence of willingness to pay. through this voice of customer studies or adoption of similar solutions. Competitive applications will be ones that can demonstrate the highly potent and maximally implementable behavioural interventions that improve the health and the well-being and can be sustainable. In other words, articulate your approach in getting the buy-in from the decision makers or the gatekeepers that will pay or fund the implementation and continue the availability of your solution.
Great, thanks everyone for that. So we appreciate that you may still be years away from these later stages of development, and indeed you might not take your product through the clinic yourself. So if you have access to commercialization experts like technology transfer office or business development groups within your medical research institute or your university, or if you're a SME, other commercialization consultants, we really strongly encourage you to discuss your application with them and to leverage their expertise and advice. Another reminder that this section is worth 20% of the mark, and we don't want you to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, with some of the earlier sections and then have this as underdeveloped and therefore, you know, jeopardize your position in the program. So last but not least, we arrive at team and capabilities. So multidisciplinary approaches really require diverse teams. So it's important to list all the key personnel and external advisors, consultants and areas of expertise that will be required to successfully complete your TTRA project, even those who may not be contracted or engaged yet. So for example, regulatory consultants to inform some of your downstream study designs. So Lee, what other tips would you give to potential applicants this section?
Thanks, Lauren. The first would be to remind everyone that this section, same as the others, is worth 20% of your total score. So I would encourage applicants not to leave this section to the last minute or just to fill it in as an afterthought. The reviewers are going to be looking for more than just CVs here. So competitive applications will be those that can articulate how their team's skill set, experience, combined track record, diversity, and access to resource really sets them up for success. The assessment of your team in the TTRA will be quite different from other funding programs. So this is about really forming a holistic group with the required skill set to achieve your commercial or implementation goals. This is not just a list of superstars. So the panel doesn't expect that all work's going to be done in-house, so make sure you list all your external partners. Applicants should also justify each team member's contribution and role within the project. Reviewers don't want to see a long list of informal advisors. A team of 20 with a combined FTE load of less than 1 is going to raise serious concerns about how the project is being driven. Also, you've got an opportunity to highlight your team members' relevant experience or expertise outside of their job title. Now, we appreciate that small teams may not be diverse, and you're not going to be penalised for this, but it will be imperative that you outline the strategy for increasing diversity within your team. It's clear that diverse teams are innovative teams. And finally, for applicants from universities or research institutions, there's going to be an expectation that a member from your tech transfer or commercialization office is part of the team.
Great, thanks Lee. So thank you to all of our panelists, Manna, Grace, Olivia and Lee, for providing some colour to the funding guidelines and hopefully passing on really practical tips to those of you who are applying. So that does conclude the formal parts of our information session. We have about 10 minutes left to go, so I'll invite you now to ask any questions that remain unanswered in the Q&A box. I can already see that people have started to populate that. So if you see a question that you also have, you can upvote it and it will rise it to the top. There also have been some answered questions, so if you toggle along to the answered tab, you'll be able to read those and gain some further insight. So while I give everyone a bit of time just to start populating their questions, I'll remind you that EOIs for round 2 research projects are open now and that they will close on the 4th of November at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. We cannot accept late submissions, so please be mindful of the time zones and don't leave entering your EOI into Smarty Grants. The Smarty Grants platform until the last minute. You'll be able to access the Smarty Grants platform from our research projects webpage on the MTPConnect website, and it's just the Apply Here button. Please note that the Smarty Grant system is sensitive to word count and other errors and will not let you submit an application if any text field is over the word count or a required field is left empty. So unfortunately, not leaving enough time to correct any errors is not a valid excuse for a late submission. The MTPConnect team is on hand to help troubleshoot, as is the Smarty Grants help desk, and both of our contact details are found in the funding guidelines. But we will not be able to assist you if you contact us with only, say, 20 minutes to go. I'd encourage you to start entering your responses into Smarty Grants early, especially those sections which are unlikely to change. So filling in tables first, as these can be quite consuming, and all of your applicant administrative information. Always remember to save as you go. And while we don't encourage you to share login details, if you do, the system doesn't actually accommodate more than one user in the portal at the same time. So if you do have two people in there, the work of one will actually override that of the other. And unfortunately, that is not recoverable. As a reminder, we will have a third round of research projects funding opening up in the middle of next year, and this will focus on new and different priority areas following the third needs assessment. If anyone has to duck off before we finish the Q&A, there will be an anonymous survey for you to complete upon exit, and this just really helps us to know what worked well and where we can improve for next time. So let's get started on the questions. So I'll invite Dan, Manna, Erin, Olivia and Lee to turn your cameras back on and to join me back on screen, and we'll work through these questions. So the first question from Rebecca, she has asked, are CIs eligible to be on more than one application? And I am assuming that this is asking that as long as they're not the lead investigator on more than two. So yes, you can be most definitely listed on more than one application. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with being the lead on more than one application. You just need to consider capacity and the capacity that you have there. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to chime in with respect to team structure. No? Great. So the next question is from Emma, who's asked that the guidelines indicate that the research team should be diverse and possess the requisite skills to complete the project. Does MTPConnect have any preference regarding the size and composition of the team? Would you encourage early or mid-career researchers to lead applications? Is there an expected range for team size? The team should be appropriate to the research project. I think that's the first and foremost point. I know that Lee highlighted that we don't want sort of a long list of 50 team members, all of which are only, providing 0.05 FTE, because then we don't understand who is truly driving the project there. Lee, did you have anything else that you perhaps want to add there as you went through the team and capability section?
Thanks, Lauren. I would just reiterate that this isn't a list of superstars and it's a holistic view of the team. So I don't think we have any preference for the lead applicant being the most senior person on the team. Not at all. This is a little bit different. And maybe as far as your sort of question about diversity, I think maybe Grace has got a little answer that she could provide for that.
You mean in respect to Neil's question as well, tying in that diversity piece? Yeah. So diversity is not a box-ticking exercise in this program. We've got government money, taxpayers' money. We should be seeing representational teams. Teams represent the types of people we would see in the Society of Australia. So we've all seen the outcomes of those many economic studies showing direct correlation between diversity and commercial outcomes. So if your team's not yet diverse with respect to gender, career stage, cultural background, and others, you will be expected to articulate a feasible strategy. And if you need help understanding diversity and creating your strategy, there's innumerable government and non-government sources to support you with that diversity and inclusion strategy.
Great, thanks for taking on that, Grace. So we've got an anonymous question asking whether hospitals are eligible. I'd suggest that they are an eligible entity. They'd probably fall under another corporate state-based organisation, and as long as they have an ABN, they would be eligible to apply. And you'd also have to make sure that you're considering ownership of IP and being eligible with respect to IP there. We have a question from Stephen asking, in the overarching criteria, does stroke fit within the definition of cerebrovascular disease? So this is atherosclerosis, including cerebrovascular disease. I knew that would get me today. Dan, would you like to provide an answer to that question?
Yeah, so I think stroke does fit within the definition of cerebrovascular disease as defined in the guidelines.
So the next question, is there a specific partner for BI? It looks to be represented in the leadership, but not in the supporting partners. Yes, so with our partners, MDPP, UniQuest and Health, these will all be supporting in a combined fashion BI projects that come through.
I might just add to that we will also outsource required skills where necessary, should any of our existing partners not have the capabilities or capacity to review and support any application, be it BI or otherwise.
Thanks, Dan. So an anonymous audience member has asked, can a corporation with more than 200 employees be a co-applicant, covering part of the in-kind contribution with the supplement of a therapeutic drug, as in that they hold the IP. So you can have organisations that are beyond the 200 employee cap as part of your project team, so they can be a partner organisation. They wouldn't be able to be the lead organisation. If they own the IP and they control the IP, then that comes into, draws into question the eligibility, the IP eligibility side of things. So the applicant must have, must own or control or have access to use the IP. So you'll need to consider what sort of arrangement you have in the background with respect to the IP around that therapeutic drug. Lee, as a therapeutic modality expert, would you add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered all the major points, Lauren. Again, encourage people, if they're not sure about eligibility, to definitely get in contact.
Great. The next question is, can a team of academics and a corporation apply? So yes, most definitely. Who is the lead and who is actually applying as the lead? That will come down to, who controls and owns the IP. So if you have any questions, please just reach out to us directly about that. The next question is, how direct does the linkage have to be with a particular priority area? So this is assessed. And so maybe, Olivia, you would like to provide more colour here as you took on challenge and solution.
Sure. So, it is a competitive process. So the closer you are to the priority area, the stronger your application will be. And that's going to be how you articulate that strength and that value proposition in the section. So I would advise, to write and rewrite and read and try and ensure that you're really nailing it in that front section.
Great, thanks. So Narelle has asked, what if their organisation more generally is very diverse, but not necessarily the project team? So Grace, you sort of spoke to diversity before, and as Lee pointed out, you won't be penalised if it's a small project team, but we are looking for strategies with respect to increasing diversity. Would you add anything to that, Grace?
Around not knowing your organisation, sorry. But I think that if you already have an existing organisational strategy, for example, you're from a university and this small team, this subset team happens to not be diverse, a plan to increase the diversity as the team grows. Presumably we're helping you to grow and commercialise and translate, I think is important. And a nod to your university or institute, for example, I don't know your organisation again, their strategy and their track record in that space really shows a commitment to diversity.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm conscious of time. We've got about a minute left on our scheduled information session, and there are still 10 unanswered questions. So we'll keep going through, but after that we might have to close the session and get back to anybody who has left their name attached to a question. And if you have submitted it anonymously, then if you can get directly in touch with us, we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. So we've got a question from an anonymous: would acute kidney injury or chronic kidney injury fall within the scope of atherosclerosis? Dan, would you care to address this?
I think we'd have to understand exactly what aspects of chronic kidney injury they are looking at to make that determination. Kidney disease did feature in the last rounds. I'm happy to talk offline.
Yeah, so please get in touch with us. So then we had a question from Keely, just wanting to confirm that paediatric diabetes will be considered equally in this scheme. So yes, when it's saying broadly with respect to diabetes, most definitely. And if you have a question specifically about your project, again, please just get into contact with us and we can help you assess whether you align to the priority areas. There's a question from Rebecca asking, is the lead of successful applications usually an organisation, example, a small biotech rather than a scientist? So there is no preference given to the lead at all. We're looking, when we're assessing team, we are assessing the team in its entirety. So who makes up that team, obviously wanting to make sure that there is a key driver of that project as well. The next question is, would a combination of two modalities be accepted? For example, digital health and behavioural change. So this was discussed during the panel discussion. So perhaps Manna and Grace would like to tackle this as the examples are digital health and behaviour change.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, thanks.
You
Thanks,
go, Manna.
Lauren. Yeah, sure. As mentioned in the panel discussion, when your behavioral intervention or your digital health a project that has another component of another modality, the key aspect that you need to have a think about is where does your core innovation lies. So if your digital component is where most of your innovative aspect or most differentiation from the other products out there in the markets, then should definitely apply through the digital stream. But if it's a combination of the two, also have to think about what makes your project the strongest and make it most competitive as well. So maybe I'll throw to Grace, if a digital health project that has more behavioral components into it, how would you like to advise them?
It also looks towards what is success here, right? What is the commercial translational outcome? So if you're looking for implementation and a health economics benefit to be your sort of level measure of success, then you'll be better able to answer the behavioural questions because they're more framed around that. Whereas if you're trying to build a commercial product that might be on-sold or reimbursed, then you'll be more able to strongly answer that section in the digital health as well. So it's about what does success look like in the scheme of this TTRA in terms of that translation and commercialization.
Great, thank you for that. I might just jump down a couple because I've seen there's a question around IP, which would be useful for everyone. This is from Johannes. So for those who don't have full IP protection, example, just a provisional patent application at this point, would the EOI be considered a disclosure for IP purposes? So we'll highlight firstly that EOIs are to be non-confidential in nature, so please don't include any enabling data that could therefore jeopardise your IP position. Would anybody else like to weigh in on that?
I would just like to add that you should definitely, if you're at a university, talk to your tech transfer office, get them to have a look at your EOI application, make sure you don't disclose anything that shouldn't be in the public domain.
Great. We've been asked, would a combination of two priority areas be acceptable? Example, both priority 3 and 5. So you will just need to select, it's mutually exclusive. You can only select one priority area. So if you are unsure, please get in touch with us and we can talk you through which a priority area your project most aligns with. We've been asked, would a medical device that monitors blood pressure align with priority area 2? Again, it's probably best if you get in contact with us straight away so we can talk through this project in more detail and help you assess whether you would be eligible to apply.
Lauren, might just add to that what we don't want to see is people trying to force square pegs into round holes. And so we often see that the priority areas are listed, and then people will mention that priority area once in their application and then move on to their favorite research project. And that's not the intent. So for any of these, if you're developing a device that has direct applicability to cardiomyopathy and heart failure, then you need to build that story in your application to make sure that it truly is aligned with what the priority area is.
Great. Thank you. And the final question, and we're only 5 minutes over, so apologies everybody. Can PhD candidates be considered the principal investigator? So we don't have any restrictions on who is named the principal investigator, and we do look at the team holistically. The team is assessed. Would anybody else care to weigh into this question?
I think we've answered this question solidly.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Again, if you have any other questions that you would like answered, please just get in touch with us directly. But I'd like to now thank our presenters and panelists today. So Dan, Erin, Manna, Grace, Olivia and Lee, as well as our behind the scenes with Libby, who you heard from right at the beginning, as well as Amabel and Andrew for your assistance in the Q&A box and answering some of the questions there. So we thank everyone for joining us, and we hope that this information session has provided really practical tips and advice for you as you progress the development of your EOI. If you do need to reach out to us to ask a question about your eligibility or how your project aligns to a priority area, please email us. As always, we're here to help and happy to help. So thank you all and have a lovely rest of your afternoon.